Hey everybody, we are live here, so I'm going to take a second and share the link with people, and we'll get started in just a second. Thank you so much for being here. Whether you are tuning in live or watching this later, I really appreciate that you're taking the time to listen to me run my mouth. So bear with me and we'll get started in just a sec. Oh, there's the dog. I should probably go fix that. Oh, dog. Oh, Hash. Okay, so I have several windows open here. Bear with me. This is my first time doing this, so I'm trying to make sure that I can see comments where I need to see them. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Okay. So here we go. So if we haven't met before, my name's Mia, and I originally presented this panel at GeekyCon, which was this past weekend, July 30th. I was the Saturday 10 o'clock spot. There's my dog again. His name is Pepper, and he's a jerk. So what is this panel about? The idea is I'm a lifelong Disney fan. I've grown up with the movies. I've grown up with these stories. And now I have a daughter of my own, and I'm looking at them a lot more critically. There's this idea of like, okay, I love this, but could we change it to make it better? So what we're going to do is try to cover 80 years of female character development in about 35 minutes, except it'll probably end up more like 50 minutes. Sorry, not sorry. So we're, in the interest of time, we're not going to look at every single movie that was made or every single heroine that Disney has. So let me tell you who we are going to look at. First off, I narrowed it down to leading ladies, a character who would have like top 3 billing in the cast. I did not include villains, although there are some very interesting women in the Disney villain canon. And I also excluded the ladies of Pixar. A lot of people like to argue with me and tell me, no, Pixar's Disney, but they're not. They maintain entirely separate production staffs. There are different facilities, different buildings. So you kind of have to look at them like step siblings. They are related, but they don't share the same storytelling DNA. So great characters like Dory, Merida, the entire cast of Inside Out. Sadly, we're not looking at them today. We're also not going to look at direct-to-video sequels, TV shows, books, any of that. We're just looking at theatrically released movies. So from the 56 films in the animated feature canon, I chose what I felt were the top 36 heroines and we're going to touch on 24 of those today. So if I skip over your favorite character, please accept my apologies. It's all in the interest of time. So let's start with some general stats. 42% of those 36 characters that I looked at are princesses. If we extend our search to characters who are rich or in positions of power, that number increases to 58%. Now, I don't know, maybe some of you are fabulously wealthy, maybe even some of you are princesses, but I can promise you that there are not 58% of us who are princesses or wealthy or in power. So why would I start there? In storytelling, representation really matters. I've heard the idea that stories are windows and mirrors. They're windows in the sense that they allow us to look out towards new places, new ideas that maybe we wouldn't otherwise have access to. They're mirrors in the sense that they show us ourselves, both individually and as humans, as a society. So if all of our windows and mirrors tell us that girls are princesses, that starts to change our idea of what a girl can or should be. In human development, there's a theory called social cognitive theory. And that says that there are two main ways that we learn. And social cognitive theory applies to everything from acquiring gender roles to even little things like knowing when to say please and thank you. Method one is called direct tuition, meaning we're told how to behave by parents or other authority figures. And we are rewarded for doing the right things and punished for doing the wrong things. Hopefully you can hear the quotes there when I say wrong. So when a mom tells her son that he can't play with Barbies because those are for girls, that's direct tuition. That's a way of discouraging a certain type of gender role. Method two is called modeling, and that means copying what we see our friends and family do. If you have any kids in your life, you know that they copy the things around them for better, for worse. And they also copy what they see in the media. Like when my daughter tries to shoot spider webs at people because, hey, that's what Spider-Man does and it works for him. So why can't she do that to other shoppers at Target? Both modeling and direct tuition happen repeatedly over time. Happen over time through repeated exposure. So the kinds of stories that we tell are very important. We know that there's more than one way to be a man or more than one way to be a woman, and our stories should reflect that. Being a princess who falls in love with a prince is only one of those ways. But when 85% of our adult heroines are involved in a heterosexual romance, that starts to tell us, hey, this is the way to be. And it's not that there's anything wrong with being in love or telling a story about love. The problem is when that's the only story we tell, right? I mean, there's more to life than romance. There's careers and travel and friends and family. But with regard to family, 14 of the 20 characters whose families are mentioned in the plot have at least one dead parent. 70% of them have at least one dead parent. So here's the thing. Orphans are popular in storytelling because they force a character to go out and figure things out for themselves. So Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, Daenerys Targaryen, they're all orphans. And that's cool. It's a popular storytelling trope, but it would be nice to have characters who have a different kind of dynamic with their family. 30% of the human heroines are women of color, which is almost 10% less than in the actual American population. And only 17% of the voice actresses were women of color. So that's some significant underrepresentation happening in Disney casting. That's a lot of missing mirrors. If you are watching live and you have a question, feel free to either comment on the Google Hangout or on one of the current links on Facebook, and hopefully I will see it and be able to answer that question as we go along. So again, there's nothing inherently wrong with a story about a hero who's an orphan white princess and falls in love with a white guy. It's not that story is wrong. The problem is it's a pattern in Disney storytelling that we could argue is hogging more than its fair share of the stories that Disney has chosen to tell. So that's some general background. So now we're going to start looking at some specific heroines. What is now Walt Disney Animation Studios was founded by brothers Walt and Roy in 1923. In 1928, we get the birth of Mickey Mouse and the first cartoons with built-in sound. 4 years after that, we get Technicolor. And armed with these incredible storytelling tools, sound and color, Walt Disney makes the decision to start production on the world's first full-length animated feature film in 1934. Now, people in Hollywood thought that this was an incredibly stupid idea. They said, well, sure, cartoons work for, a few minutes at a time, but who's going to want to watch a 90-minute cartoon? So to work against that fear, a lot of early Disney films are based on existing stories. The studio took something that was already successful and put their own spin on it. For their first feature film, Snow White, it wasn't so much about come see a new story as it was come see how we tell you a story that you already know. So work begins on this movie in 1934, right? At that point, America was in the process of recovering from the Great Depression, and film was really taking off as a way to relax and escape from everyday life. Women had gotten the right to vote about 15 years earlier, but for the most part, a woman's role was still to be a good wife and mother. That domestic setting is really clear with our first ever Disney heroine, Snow White. She spends the majority of the film either asleep or cleaning, and her story's conclusion is when the prince turns up, rescues her, and literally carries her off into the sunset. Now, this movie's a classic. Most people have seen it. So I took a survey, and I asked people how they would describe Snow White. I got over 100 responses, and these are the results. I tallied them up, made a graphic for you. The most common answers were some variation on the word sweet, cheerful, friendly, gentle. People also said that Snow White was submissive and helpless. Snow White spends most of the film reacting to things that other characters have chosen to do. One of the only times that we see her take initiative is when she decides to start cleaning the dwarf's cottage because she's determined that there cannot possibly already be a woman there to clean it. So again, she's fairly one-dimensional, but it was the first time that anyone in the world had created a cartoon character, an animated character, that had to hold up for the length of an entire feature film. We don't have any heroines in the 1940s. The first few movies for that decade were modest successes, and then World War II hit, and the studio went to work for the military. In the 1940s, a lot of people don't know this, Disney was creating propaganda films for the US military. That wasn't really very lucrative, so in 1948, they were broke, the studio was struggling. They decided to start production on another fairy tale because that worked really well the first time, so this time they choose Cinderella. Cinderella was released in 1950. At this point, women had had the right to vote for 30 years, and World War II did a lot for feminism, with so many women joining the workforce. It was clear at this point that women had more options in society and had a lot more strength in society than people had been giving them credit for. Cinderella was a financial success and essentially saved the Disney studio. Just like Snow White, Cinderella is orphaned, friendless, facing a cruel stepmother, and life as a domestic servant. She falls in love on her one night off and escapes to a better life through marriage. When I asked survey respondents what they remembered about Cinderella, many of the same words from Snow White came up, but we also start to see signs of inner strength. Besides the kind and sweet and gentle, we also have words like endurance and hope and hardworking. Resourcefulness. Cinderella is very much a survivor. The studio had more experience, and so their heroine has a little more depth. The third original princess, Aurora, whose film was released in 1959, Sleeping Beauty, is another orphan friendless teenager who falls in love with someone in the span of one song. Her only job during the first half of the movie is to avoid getting poisoned, which she fails at, and then she spends the entire second half of the movie asleep. For a movie that's named after her, she doesn't really have a whole heck of a lot to do. So some people would argue that we don't have a lot of feminist progress from Snow White to Aurora. In between Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty in the early 50s, we get our first young girl heroines, Alice and Wendy. Alice in Wonderland was released in 1951, and again, we have an old familiar story made new. Most of Alice's story arc is her wandering around, reacting to the strange and whimsical things around her. So she's kind of a passive character, but then again, she's 10. She doesn't have a whole lot of initiative, let's say. She's very curious, inquisitive, and that's kind of her deal. Peter Pan was released in 1953. Now, if you look closely at their faces, you'll see that Alice and Wendy share a very similar character design. They're both upper middle class, English background, and they even share the same voice actress. In the movie, Wendy, who's 12, is grappling with the idea that her parents want her to like grow up and take her place in the circle of life, right? I mean, they want her to be more mature, which for her, as a Victorian character coming to life in the 1950s, pretty much her only option is to be a wife and mother. So she goes to Wonderland as a surrogate mother for the lost boys, and she plays at the idea of romance with Peter Pan. It's worth noting that in contrast to the very wholesome Wendy, the other women in Peter Pan have kind of seductive character designs. Wendy feels jealous of them because she feels like she's in competition for Peter's attention. If you've never heard of the virgin and whore dichotomy, it's a really interesting idea, which is essentially that girls can either be, wholesome and completely non-sexual, or they're whores, which obviously is not valid at all. But that's kind of a dichotomy that we see in this story in Peter Pan. So we've got Tinkerbell, the mermaids, they're both very sexy. The other character who we have is Tiger Lily, who's also very alluring and typecast as this Indian princess. She lives in a village with women who are either as alluring as she is or who look like this. The squaw, as she's known in the film, shares a basic character design with the Queen of Hearts, who's another very unlikable character. Peter Pan was the first time Disney had portrayed human people of color in one of their animated films. If you haven't watched it recently and you go back and watch that "Why is the Red Man Red" sequence, it's embarrassing at best. Honestly, it's like a shameful part of Disney history. And I say that as a hardcore Disney fan. But that sequence is not how we should be representing anybody. So clearly we've got a long way to go with the white-centric ordeal that we've got going on at Disney at this point. So anyway, we mentioned a little bit earlier the two ways that we learn social behaviors, which were direct tuition, when you're told directly, and modeling. Hold on, let's see, I got a question here. Oh, okay. Never mind. So with modeling is really important to talk about because it happens so naturally when we interact with media. So what are some of the things that make a character more likely to be someone that a child is going to look up to and want to copy? Well, the first point is that attractive, well-liked characters are more likely to be copied than ugly, disliked villains. If a character is shunned by the rest of the population, that is not somebody that kids are going to want to copy. It's human instinct to want to be liked and want to fit in, so we tend to avoid the kinds of behavior that would get us kicked out of the group. If you guys ever watched The Smurfs, everybody wanted to be a Smurf. Nobody wanted to be Gargamel because nobody liked Gargamel. So nobody is imitating Gargamel because he was a jerk. So we want to copy the behavior that is likable by other characters, or well-liked by other characters. We are also more likely to copy characters who look and sound like ourselves, who have the same social class and ethnic background, which isn't to say that a character that's nothing like us won't be copied, just that it's easier to project ourselves onto a character that is similar to ourselves. And finally, human characters are less likely to be models than non-human characters. As viewers, we relate more easily to our same species than we do like talking objects or, talking animals. Which is important because for the next 20 years of Disney history, all of the heroines are anthropomorphized animals. Anthropomorphic means something usually that can talk and that has human qualities. Walt Disney Animation had done these types of movies before the war with Bambi and Dumbo and in a lot of their short cartoons. I mean, the entire studio is built on the back of a talking mouse in red shorts. So they've kind of got the anthropomorphic thing down. The first heroine in the movies would be Lady from Lady and the Tramp. She's our first anthropomorphic heroine in 1955. Survey takers described her as genteel, protective, loyal. My favorite response that somebody had in the survey was that Lady just really likes Italian food. Lady is fairly sheltered and spoiled, and she falls in love with a street-smart mutt. She shares that same very feminine vibe as the other 50s heroines, Aurora, Alice, and Wendy. Although she does have a little more kick to her in the fight sequence at the end where she's fighting the rat to save her family's human baby, or her human family's baby. So that shows a little more spunk than maybe we've had in the fact that she is engaging in physical combat. In 1961, we have Perdita, who is from 101 Dalmatians. She's a brave mom determined to get back her 15 puppies when they've been stolen from her. And for the first time, we really start to see a heroine in a leadership position. She and Pongo are really partners in getting their pups back. It's not just that he's in charge and she follows what he says. She does her own share of leadership and directing the other animals and how to mount this escape mission. In 1966, Walt Disney passed away, and after his death, the studio entered kind of like a downward spiral that a lot of people call the Disney Dark Ages. A lot of the movies made during the Dark Ages, which falls for the 70s and 80s, just aren't as popular as movies made before or after, although it does have one of my favorites, which is 1973's Robin Hood, which features Maid Marian. Maid Marian is very romantic. She's a damsel in distress, and her primary plot function is to sit and pine after Robin Hood. So again, she doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but she's very sweet, and I love her anyway. So for our three canine heroines, again, we have this impression of sweetness, daintiness, gentleness. That's our pervading traits so far. And that traditional femininity continues on with Duchess from 1970's The Aristocats and Miss Bianca in 1977's The Rescuers. These two characters share a voice actress, and they're both very elegant and sophisticated. Like Lady and Maid Marian, both of them end up falling in love with a commoner and living happily ever after. Miss Bianca holds the honor of being the only Disney heroine with a theatrically released sequel, which was 1990's Rescuers Down Under. But not many people have really seen it. So she's a character who is adventurous and brave and clever, but unfortunately it's not a movie that is marketed to children in the modern era, which is really a shame because she's a really cool character. But again, downside to being part of the Disney Dark Ages. So we said that for successful modeling, the most effective characters are ones that are humans. And yet, between 1960 and 1989, we only have one human heroine. It's a lot harder to project yourself on and say, hey, that character is just like me, when that character is a Cocker Spaniel. So for these 30 years, the only human we have is Princess Eilonwy, who's from the Black Cauldron, and like literally no one has seen that movie. I mean, when we did this live at Geeky, I knew I had hardcore Disney fans in the room because several people had seen it, but most people cannot even tell you what this movie is. So we, sorry, I had a question. We're good. Okay. So that's the Disney Dark Ages, 70s and 80s. A lot of those movies are swept under the rug, but now it's time for the late 80s, and this is when things start to pick up. By 1989, women had had the right to vote for 70 years. The feminism of the 60s and 70s had pushed what was acceptable for women forward. We started to see women who are independent, and it's okay to be independent. It's okay to be single. We start to see women in positions of power, management in the workplace. We finally got a woman on the US Supreme Court. So we had lots and lots and lots of change happening in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, we also start to see a lot more options for girls and women in movie roles. Everything from romantic fairy tale princesses, like in The Princess Bride, to tough action heroes and things like Terminator and Alien. So over at Disney, their confidence was kind of shaken up in the fact that they'd had so many failures over the last couple of years. But Walt Disney's nephew came on board, and he started to steer the studio into a new direction. Under the new system, the first movie that came out was Oliver and Company, which came out in '88, and had a lot of big modern musical numbers with performances by well-known pop stars. We had Billy Joel, we had Bette Midler. So although it's maybe not the best Disney movie ever made, it was really catchy and it worked. And it set the studio up for what we now call the Disney Renaissance. If you're in your 20s and 30s, these are the movies that you grew up with, the ones that you went to see in theaters, the VHS tapes that you wore out. The studio went back to fairy tale musicals, but they were updated for modern audiences. And with the story, the heroines got updated too. The one that kicks it all off is Ariel in 1989's The Little Mermaid. Pro tip, if you have long hair and you have never done this at the pool, I don't know what you're doing with your life, and you need to go fix that right now. It is amazing. Please do it. Now, back to Ariel. When I asked my survey takers what they had to say about her, a lot of powerful words came up. They said she's headstrong, determined, adventurous, brave. I mean, Ariel has a fight with a great white shark and just shrugs it off and continues with her day. She single-handedly saves someone from a sinking ship that is also on fire, which is the first time in Disney history that we have a princess rescuing the prince. She deals in black magic to achieve her goals, which, granted, is not the best decision, but man, does Ariel have initiative. She has a lot of admirable, strong qualities that our earlier heroines don't. But Ariel's a 16-year-old teenager, and she makes a lot of naive and, frankly, short-sighted decisions. She's fascinated with the human world, so she falls in love with the first hot human she sees, ends up married to him by the end of the week, leaving everything she's ever known behind, including her entire family, all of her friends, and like literally her entire world. This is how I know I'm getting old, because I really feel for King Triton now when I watch this movie. When I was younger, I was like, you go, Ariel. And now I'm like, no, Ariel, why? Don't do that. Stay home. Now, although Ariel has a lot of what we've called modern qualities, these active qualities, she's very much like Snow White. She's a young girl hoping someday she can be somewhere else with someone else, and she falls in love at first sight, gets married, and lives happily ever after. So from 1937 to 1989, I mean, we have some change, but there's a lot of things that are still very much the same. The Little Mermaid was such a success that it became the template for the next decade or so of Disney movies. Let's see, I'm going to answer some questions. Hold on. Nope. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so in 1991, we've got Beauty and the Beast, which holds the honor of being the first Disney animated screenplay written by a woman. We also have our first Disney heroine who is frequently described as smart. With Belle, we finally get an intelligent character. Hooray! And it only took us 54 years to get here. Hooray! So it feels like a big shift, right? We finally have this smart character, but she's still a white teenager with a dead parent, no human friends, who falls in love in a short period of time and lives happily ever after with her wealthy white prince. On top of that, a lot of critics would argue that Belle suffers from Stockholm Syndrome. If you've never heard the idea of Stockholm Syndrome, that's when somebody is held captive and they think, well, this person isn't abusing me, so they can't be all that bad, right? Wrong. That person is holding you captive. That is not a healthy basis for a relationship. So how she falls in love with the Beast when he's like trying to prevent her from returning to her actual life and wants to hold her captive literally forever, I just don't understand. I don't understand how that works. It's not a healthy relationship. So that's Belle. We also have the fact that she's a bookworm, which is really, really cool. However, it is not behavior that she is rewarded for. All of the townspeople treat her like an outcast for always having her nose in a book, which, granted, says more about them than it does about her, but their disdain affects how likely her book-loving behavior is to be copied by a young viewer. It's not portrayed as a desirable trait in that town. What the town does value is Belle's physical beauty. It's all anybody wants to talk about as she walks through town. It's the reason Gaston wants to marry her. Even her name means beauty. Belle herself is outspoken and smart and unafraid to be who she is, but she doesn't have a chance to showcase her intelligence. In Belle, we have a character who's trying to prove that you can be brave and smart. Smart and intelligent. Wait, no, that's the same thing. Smart and beautiful. There we go. Third time's a charm. Belle's trying to prove that you can be smart and beautiful at the same time, which we know, but she doesn't have a chance to prove that over the course of her plot. In 1992, we get Aladdin, which gives us our first princess of color, Jasmine. Jasmine shares a lot of qualities with her white counterpart. She has an absent mother, no human friends, falls in love, and gets engaged in 3 days. But like Ariel and Belle, she wants something more than what society is currently telling her she can do, which is to marry a prince. She wants to marry for love, to have an actual relationship. She's also tired of being bound by the rules and responsibilities of being a princess, so she runs away and disguises as a peasant, at which point we discover she has no practical knowledge and lives in a place that is violent and barbaric. Now, there are a lot of problems with how the Middle East is portrayed in this film, which are outside the scope of our discussion today. But one thing that critics point out is that Jasmine and the other women in this film are portrayed with a harem girl stereotype. Jasmine's outfit makes no sense when trying to place her in time or space. We know Agrabah is a fictional location, but it was a filmmaker's choice to make Jasmine a little more exotic and a little more sexy than some of the other characters we've had. Jasmine is our youngest princess after Snow White. She turns 15 at the end of the movie, and yet we have this scene where she uses her sexual power to distract the middle-aged bad guy in order to save her boyfriend's life, which is so gross on so many levels. So we have progress during the first half of the Disney Renaissance. We have women who are smart, independent, go-getters, but it comes at the price of a huge emphasis on beauty and physicality and sexualization of characters that are supposed to be role models for young children. The height of the Disney Renaissance was 1994's The Lion King, which sadly we're skipping over today. And then we continue on to the mid and late 90s. First up, in 95, we have Disney's first American princess, Pocahontas. Now, this movie is also historically inaccurate. It's got a lot of problems, but at least Pocahontas is more accurate and positive than the last portrayal of Native Americans that we had in 1953's Peter Pan. We also have a lot of firsts with Pocahontas. She's the first Disney heroine that we have who is physically strong and athletic. Pocahontas is running through the forest, she's climbing trees, she's got perfect form jumping down a waterfall. So she's very strong, physically strong, which is something that we haven't seen in a heroine so far. She's also our first heroine to have an actual friend, a human friend, Nakoma. Not just a twittering bird or a talking fish or a singing candlestick, but a human. And one of the things that's cool about their relationship is that you can tell that they go way back. The storytellers chose to give her a real relationship, a real history with Nakoma, which is really cool. With most of the other Disney heroines who have no human friends, remember, we've got role models here. So if we're not modeling how to have successful female friendships, that complicates things when girls grow older. If all you ever see is women who are by themselves in competition with other women, that sets up a frame of reference mentally for young women, young girls, in how to set up their friendships. So it's really cool that finally we have a human-to-human friendship in the form of Nakoma. Pocahontas is also the first Disney heroine to end the film single. Now, John Smith got shot and has to go back to England for medical treatment. Although how he's supposed to survive that 2-month voyage across the Atlantic with a bullet in his gut, I don't know. But she has the choice to go with him or stay with her people in a new settlement. Some critics have argued that Pocahontas is kind of stuck in like a feminist catch-22, because if she leaves, she's pulling an Ariel, right? Like she doesn't know when or if she'll ever come back. She's leaving her whole life and family behind, her friends behind, her world behind, in order to pursue a relationship with somebody that she's known for what, like 48 hours? So, there's a problem there. And in choosing to stay, which is the choice that she makes, it casts her in the role of a dutiful daughter. She is a community leader, which is really cool. And I think Pocahontas makes the right choice in choosing to stay. But there's a part that's like, well, why couldn't she go have an adventure? Why did she have to stay? So again, kind of a catch-22. Pocahontas is kind of damned if she does and damned if she doesn't in terms of her options. It's also worth noting that this first relationship to end in separation is also Disney's first interracial relationship, which is interesting. It took us to 1995 to finally have an interracial relationship, and they don't even get to stay together. From America, we go back to France for Esmeralda in 1996's Hunchback of Notre Dame. Some progress that we have with Esmeralda is that she's outspoken, she promotes justice and fair treatment for minorities, she's smart and compassionate and clever. The problem we have is that aside from being persecuted for her minority status, An old white guy decides that Esmeralda is literally too sexy to live. Now, there are a lot of discussions in our society right now about rape culture and how women have to fear rejecting men because there might be violence in return. There's this whole thing with women feeling that they have to give out fake numbers instead of saying, no, I just don't want to give you my number, because it's scary. It's scary to turn a man down in our modern day world, in 21st century America. And in Esmeralda's case, when she rejects the judge, he burns down half of Paris and tries to burn her at the stake. Like, that's intense, dude. Just calm down. She said no. So with Esmeralda, the character design that they have with her also feeds into that narrative. They made her very sexy and arguably objectified. The animators put a lot of emphasis on her large breasts and her small waist. And we have three different male characters who are interested in her over the course of the film. So she should be able to dress however she wants, behave however she wants, to do what she wants to do. But we have her punished and vilified and objectified for being who she is. So thematically, Hunchback is a very complicated film, and it's really confusing for young viewers. I think for a young audience, it's not clear what the takeaway should be here. Now, in '97, we go to Greece to meet Megara in Hercules. Meg is easily the most sarcastic and sassy heroine that we've looked at today. She's not looking for love because she's busy paying off the debt of having sold her soul to Hades in order to save the life of her boyfriend, who then dumps her anyway. So she's a little salty, we could say. And when she meets Hercules, she doesn't fall in love at first sight. It takes them a couple of meetings and really a full afternoon spent together in order for her to start developing feelings for him, which is really nice to see. This relationship that takes time to flourish. Herc, however, has completely different ideas. Within 24 hours, he has given up everything for her. He gives up his strength. He is okay with sacrificing his life. And then he gives up his immortal soul in order to stay with her, like 24 hours after she's just admitted that, you know what, maybe she kind of likes him and maybe is in love with him. So talk about commitment. Herc is really raising the bar there. The last stop for the Disney Renaissance is China with 1998's Mulan. Like so many of our heroines, she's another friendless teenager, but she has both parents still alive and in the plot. Hooray! For those of you keeping track, this is the 17th character that we have looked at today, and the first one to have both parents alive and part of her story. The first adult heroine. Other than that, we've only had Wendy. Survey takers unanimously agreed on bravery as Mulan's defining trait. They also said she was strong, determined, and selfless. One of the things that I love about Mulan is that she has a clear, non-romantic goal in this film. She wants to save her dad and her family's honor by fighting in the war on his behalf. She risks so much to meet that goal, and none of that is for her own personal glory. That is all for her family and her father. Along the way, she falls in love, but that doesn't happen in a matter of days. Mulan and Shang get to know each other over weeks or maybe months as she trains in the military and fights alongside him. There's an interesting talk to be had here about the fluidity of gender and sexuality, because she's impersonating a man for the first half of the film as she starts to build a relationship with Shang. What that does is that they are truly getting to know each other, not based on looks or physical attraction, but on their personalities, on their souls. Their relationships comes from a place of mutual respect, of really getting to know each other and liking what the other person has to offer. So at the end of the film, he's staying for dinner. It's implied that they're going to start a relationship. Her grandma really wants him to stay for dinner, that's for sure. But we haven't gone from first sight to wedding bells at warp speed the way we have with so many of these other heroines. Now, Mulan herself goes through a lot of changes throughout her personal arc in the movie. She goes from a village girl to a clumsy boy to being a fierce female warrior in her own right. She really challenges the feminine standard that Disney has set over the last 60 years of their filmmaking. But the problem is that they don't know what to do with it. Disney marketing has no idea what to do with Mulan. If you go to visit her at a Disney theme park, she looks like this, which is, you know, the version of herself that she had an entire ballad dedicated to saying how that was not the real her. Like, when will I be the person I really am on the inside and the outside? When will they match? Because in this outfit, they do not match. That is not who Mulan really is. And if you go to buy a Mulan doll, it looks like this. And you already know what the available costumes are like. So Mulan is stripped of that warrior aspect, and she's kind of reduced to this feminine, romantic version that she would probably tell you is not the real her. It's a really frustrating marketing choice from Disney, and sadly, it's one that affects a lot of the other heroines in their lineup. Some of the dolls are so glammed up as to be almost unrecognizable. Here we have Jasmine, Pocahontas, and Merida. And I know we said we're not talking about Merida. We are not talking about Merida, but here she is. These are the current iterations of these characters on the shelves right now. These toys are made by Hasbro. This is what you find at Target and at Walmart right now. Jasmine is wearing pajamas. I guess they tried to make her a little less sexy. Pocahontas looks like she's ready to go pick up a pumpkin spice latte. And Merida literally would be pissed to be in this outfit because she wouldn't be able to breathe or climb cliffs or do archery in it. Like, this is not who these characters are. I don't know who is making decisions. I don't know if they've seen the movies, but I have a lot of problems with the current lineup of dolls. Now, we talked about modeling and direct tuition, right? For children, the toys that they have to play with inform the kinds of stories that they tell. If, let's say that all the toys that a child has are race cars, they're going to be telling a lot of stories about competition, about races, about who can be better, who can be faster, because that's the narrative that those toys fit into. With dolls who are princessy and just pretty, it reduces the number of options that a child has with that storytelling. Dolls and toys are tools for children with which to tell stories. And so the representation that we have in those dolls and toys for any child, male or female, or whatever gender identity they have, are very important. Dolls are tools, and they inform the storytelling choices that a child can make in creating narratives for themselves. So that's the peak of the Disney Renaissance. After that, we have Tarzan in '99, which most people say marks the end of the Renaissance. And after that, we have a decade that's filled with flops that really are maybe not the best movies, like popular or marketable or even really of any kind of quality. Home on the Range, Chicken Little. Brother Bear was okay, but they aren't enduring popular movies, and they aren't as marketable as some of the other ones. Now, a movie that did do well during this decade is Lilo and Stitch, which brings us not one, but two heroines. Nani and her little sister Lilo are the first human Disney characters who are set in the modern day. Before that, we have Oliver and Company, and I want to say there's one other one. Oh, Rescuers, yeah. Oliver and Company and Rescuers, which are both set in their modern times. However, both of those have anthropomorphic protagonists. So Nani and Lilo are our first human modern protagonists. And not only do we have that shift in setting and in characterization, but we also have a shift in themes. With this movie, we move away from the romantic fairy tale story, and we have one that's about family. We have Ohana, the idea that family is by choice. It means taking care of each other, watching out for each other. Family, no one gets left behind, right? So Nani and Lilo are both struggling at the beginning of the story after the death of their parents. Nani has a lot of responsibility on her shoulders. She's trying to take care of her younger sister without a support network. And Lilo is struggling with being outcast with the other girls, with like the kids in her hula school. She's outcast, and she's kind of by herself, and she's very lonely. By the end of the film, the girls have a large extended family. We have Stitch, we have some of the aliens, we have Mr. Cobra Bubbles, and we also have David, who is a character I really like. At the beginning of the film, David is pretty much the only friend that we see Nani have, and he'd really like to date her, but she's got too much going on. He respects that, and he's a friend for her. He just really supports her. At the end of the film, it's implied that they're dating. and we kind of have a natural, realistic progression for the relationship. They start out as friends, and then they start to date, which is really cool. Again, a natural, I think, healthy model for how a relationship could go. And also, it's a minor subplot in the film. It's not the focus of the movie. The focus of the movie is Lilo and what she goes through. And Lilo herself is a very different character from Alice and Wendy from 50 years ago. She's far from that prim, proper daintiness, right? She's fist fighting one minute, she's making voodoo dolls the next. Surveyors described her as quirky and open-hearted, creative, and she's arguably more complex than characters like Wendy and what is her name? Alice. Sorry, Wendy and Alice. So Lilo is, very funny and playful and caring, but she's also very vulnerable and moody because of her grief and isolation. And I think that's a really interesting point. We've talked today about windows and mirrors. And you know what? Sometimes life sucks and characters have to go through that. Sometimes our lives suck and we have to go through that. So having a character that we can relate to who's going through tough times is a really important and very interesting choice of a window and mirror. In 2006, Disney acquired Pixar, and they also, with that, acquired new leadership for their animation department. They got Ed Catmull and John Lasseter, who are now overseeing both Pixar and Disney. So these guys helped infuse Disney with some of the amazing track record they'd had back at Pixar, and they've been steering Disney films toward what some people are now calling a second renaissance. The first heroine after the Disney-Pixar merger is our first Black princess, Tiana. It took us 72 years to get from Snow White to Tiana, a mirror and window that we so desperately needed. This movie is by no means perfect, and one of the major problems with it is that for the majority of the movie, this beautiful princess is a frog. Personal projection doesn't work with cats and dogs, doesn't work with frogs either. Tiana's character has a lot of callbacks to the early princesses. She's down a parent, she cooks and cleans, which we haven't seen characters do from the 1950s, although it was pointed out in the panel from an attendee that, for her it is career-oriented, and we'll come back to that in a second. But she still falls in love and gets married in under a week. So what's different about her is that career-oriented goal. She has something that she wants to accomplish for her own reasons. She's not cooking and cleaning for somebody else. She's doing it for herself. She's working hard to make the money to fulfill her dream of owning her own restaurant, which was a dream that she shared with her dad before he passed. When I asked people what they remembered about Tiana, one of the terms that came up frequently was Hufflepuff, which is how you know that I have cool friends. The dominant trait was hardworking. They also said she was practical and smart and warm. But the movie portrays Tiana's career focus as a flaw, something that needs to be fixed. In one of the big musical numbers, Mama Odie tells Tiana that she needs to dig a little deeper to find out what she truly needs to be fulfilled. I'm sorry, Tiana already had a goal. What she needed to be fulfilled was to own her own restaurant. But we're told that what she really, really needs is to fall in love. Tiana gets the message from Mama Odie, and therefore viewers get the message that a fulfilling life comes from more than just career. It comes from romantic love. So she ends up with Naveen at the end of the film, which apparently is now also part of her lifelong dream. So she has her restaurant, but she is forced into this kind of false completeness by having to get married as part of the plot. By the time we get to Rapunzel, we can see that we have this pattern of falling in love while trying to do something else. Mulan was just trying to save her dad. Tiana wanted to start her restaurant. Rapunzel just wanted to see some floating lanterns. She's aged up from some of the earlier heroines, celebrating her 18th birthday in the film, but she's still friendless, effectively parentless, and ends up falling in love with the first man she's ever laid eyes on. In terms of windows and mirrors, someone pointed out in the panel that Rapunzel is important because she shows someone who is resilient and kind and compassionate, even though she has what is effectively an abusive parent in the form of Mother Gothel. That's not her real mom, but that is somebody who is abusive, who gaslights her, and we see her flourish beyond that. So that is an important mirror. And at the same time, her story, again, is a lot like Ariel's and a lot like Snow White's. So we've had a lot of change, and at the same time, it seems like we've had no change at all. So now we are at the modern day, movies that have been released in the last 5 years. These are the characters that my kids growing up with, that the current generation of kids are growing up with. So what kind of role models are they getting? The most famous one right now is Elsa. She is our first Disney queen, our heroic queen anyway, and she is the only adult human heroine not to have a romantic story arc. Now, a lot of people are calling for Elsa to have a homosexual relationship if and when there is a sequel to Frozen, which we can pretty much rest assured that there will be. And it's interesting because that's a window and mirror that we don't have. Right now, Elsa, she's trying to do it all at once. She's trying to represent characters who are not in a heterosexual romance, which is lots of different categories. Maybe she's a lesbian. Maybe she's asexual. Maybe she's heterosexual and just has other things to worry about right now and isn't interested in romance. Whatever her story is, she's a mirror for a lot of people, which puts a lot of stress and weight on her as a single character. She can't do it all. So we really need to catch up and get some representation coming from other characters, from other angles. Now, in terms of personality, she's also very different from those earlier heroines. In our survey, the defining characteristic for Elsa is that she's afraid. She's afraid of herself. She's afraid of her powers. She's afraid of what people might think when they find out her terrible secret. And that's another important mirror from Elsa, is that she shows us that it's okay to love yourself, even if you have something that you think you have to hide. Her journey is about self-acceptance, loving yourself, accepting yourself for who you are, and knowing that other people will love you too, no matter what you've got going on. Her story is also about renewing a bond with her sister, a bond that had been broken over the course of their lives through this traumatic isolation that Elsa had been forced into and also enforced on herself. So people love to say that Frozen is the first Disney princess movie that is not about romantic love. But that's not true. That's not true. Elsa's story is not about romantic love, but Anna does her best to make up for it by falling in love twice in one movie. Elsa, bless her, tells Anna that you can't marry a man you just met. So at the end of the movie, Anna and Kristoff aren't married, but they're together. They're dating. Now, I'm not trying to reduce Anna's contributions to feminist history. I mean, she does choose to sacrifice herself for her sister instead of going to save herself by kissing this guy that apparently she's in love with after knowing for like 20 hours. So we are given the story of family love being a form of true love, but Frozen definitely undermines its messages. It gives very mixed messages in terms of romance versus family. So problems there. Progress, but problems. That's probably the motto for all of Disney heroines, progress but problems. Now, our most recent heroine is Judy Hopps, and I'll tell you right now that I have a lot of feelings about Judy Hopps. If you ever want to talk to me about Judy Hopps, I can do that all day. I adore her. Like Tiana, Judy set out to fulfill a lifelong dream. From the time she's a little bunny, she wants to be a police officer and make the world a better place. She's one of our oldest heroines. We have a numerical age for her confirmed by the director. She is 24. She's graduated from police academy. She has a job. She has her own apartment. She's a lot more of an adult, we could say, than some of the other characters. She also has family relationships. She has 275 brothers and sisters. She's got an uncle. She has both of her parents, and they are very flawed. They undermine her in her goals, but they're there. And for me, that was an important mirror because you know what? Not all parents are perfect and not all parents support you no matter what, but they love her and they try their best to understand her, even though they kind of don't. So finally, we have some interesting family dynamics besides A, perfect parents, or B, they're all dead. So We also see her interact with friends and acquaintances. When she's a little bunny back in Bunnyborough, she's got friends that she sticks up for. We see her have relationships with a bully and with these other kids. She moves to the big city to start her career, and she makes new friends. She ends the movie with several friends. I mean, they're not her same species, but they're on the same page. You know, they're not like candlesticks. So Judy's all the things that I love about those individual heroines from over the years mashed into one character. She is clever and determined, optimistic. She's not going to let anything get in her way. She makes huge mistakes but learns from them. She works to improve herself. She realizes, you know, that maybe she hasn't been the most open-minded person, and she works on that. So she tells a whole story by herself and is a complete person by herself without needing a romance. If someday they make a sequel and Judy finds love, more power to her. But it was so important to me to show that she had this story arc that was all hers. With Nick, he is a companion, but he is not the core of the story. The core is her story. So the problem with Judy is that she's a rabbit. So as incredible as she is, young viewers aren't quite as likely to grab onto her as if she'd been human. Now, she is very humanoid. She wears clothes and talks and has, you know, an apartment and things like that, things that give her very human qualities, but it's not 100% human. So young viewers have a problem relating to that. If you were at GeekyCon, you may have seen me cosplaying as Judy Hopps on Friday. I had ears and a tail. And when my 4-year-old saw me doing a trial run of that, she looked at me and was like, "Mommy, Judy's a rabbit with fur. You can't be Judy." So for young viewers, there's a clear delineation between human and rabbit in this case, which also means that there's a delineation between that optimism, that bravery, that determination that Judy shows. So, progress and problems. And that, folks, brings us to Moana. Moana will be our newest Disney heroine. Her movie's coming out in November of this year, 2016. Through various news releases, we've learned that she's going to be 16 years old, excuse me. She has no love interest, and she's going to go on a mission to save the world. She's a Polynesian princess with brown skin and curly hair. And I can't tell you how much it meant to me when the first trailer came out and I saw a character that looked just like me. I have short hair right now, but it was long. It looked just like Moana's. And I always felt like that couldn't possibly be beautiful. Because until then, the only beautiful characters I'd had who kind of looked like me were Mulan and Pocahontas. And I mean, no, they're not quite right, but it was the closest I had. And as I got older, even as an adult, the only character that I had who had curly hair that was kind of like mine was Mother Gothel, who's a horrible human being. So it means a lot to have a hero that looks like you. And I'm so glad that there's another generation of kids who's going to grow up and have somebody that they can look up to, they're going to have a mirror that looks like them, that reflects heroic qualities in their physical appearance. We also know that Moana has her whole family. She has her mom and dad. She has a grandmother. If any of them end up dead by the end of the movie, I will be pissed. You will hear me screaming from wherever you are, from my movie theater here in Tampa. I will riot. I will be writing angry letters. So Moana's carrying a lot of weight on her, a lot of hopes for a lot of people to make some progress for Disney heroines. So the last thing that we did at our panel is we looked at this has been the first 80 years of history, of Disney animation history. So we have 56 movies, 80 years, and this is where we've gotten so far. So as we go to the theaters, as we go to the toy store, and we vote with our dollars and our voices, what are the things that we want to see represented? And this is where you guys come in, because I would really love to continue this conversation about, you know, what do we want to see in the heroines of tomorrow? So at the panel, these are some of the things that came up. First off, we desperately need LGBT characters, preferably not just one. It's going to take a while to even the playing field, but we definitely need some LGBT representation. We also don't have any characters who are plus-sized. Somebody said that they'd like to see a heroine who's really involved in sports. It's proven empirically that most girls who start out playing sports drop out by the time they're 13 because that's not seen as an acceptable thing for girls to do, but it is. It's awesome and it's important. So a Disney princess or heroine who is athletic. We'd like to see a character who is sick and doesn't die, somebody who has a chronic illness that they live with and deal with, but that doesn't end in tragedy. We have things, again, with wanting to look the way we look. We want characters with freckles. We want characters who are multiracial. A friend mentioned to me this morning that she would really love to see a character who is a race that maybe they don't look like they are. So for everybody who's Hispanic but presents as white, you know, we'd like to see some white Latino people. I myself, you know, I'm both Filipino and Cuban and Spanish, like from Spain Spanish. And people just don't know what to do with me. And I feel like I have to pick one of those. So it would be really nice to see characters who are multiracial. We want to see more interracial relationships. So far, we only have Pocahontas and Naveen. So definitely some more variety there. It was mentioned that we'd like to see an amputee or somebody who's visibly physically disabled, maybe wheelchair, crutches, prosthetics, things like that. People who aren't default white. And what we mean by that is somebody who is a person of color, but that's not an important part of their story. For Mulan, for example, she's Chinese, and it is important for her story that she's Chinese because we have these ideas of family honor and being a dutiful daughter. So it would be nice to see characters who are people of color but aren't defined by their ethnicity. They can have a, you know, quote unquote white storyline. Like, why does your storyline have to relate to your skin color? It doesn't. It shouldn't. We'd like to see some diverse social classes. We'd like some heroes who maybe are poor or, you know, just not up with the movers and shakers of the world, because that's where we are. We're not all rich and princesses, so it'd be nice to have some diversity there. We'd like to see characters who choose something other than a love life. Characters with glasses and braces. And then the last two qualities that we're mentioning during the panel were characters who are, you know, inquisitive and who have scientific minds, maybe somebody who's like a college student who's really into discovery in a scientific manner. So those are the things that were mentioned at the panel. If you want to get in touch, I will be updating this panel to my blog later this week or perhaps next week. And if you have any suggestions of things that you would like to see, you can definitely email this to me or message them to me, and I will definitely add them to the blog write-up. So that is that. Thank you guys so much for being here, for listening. I hope that if you missed it the first time around, oh, we get another one. Somebody wants to see a character who is career-oriented. Yeah, so definitely, you know, we mentioned something other than love life. There are more things to life than love. We want characters who maybe choose a job because not everything is love. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in, watching here with me. If you catch this later on YouTube, feel free to leave something in the comments. I would love to keep this conversation going. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, guys. It's going to take me a second to log off here. Thank you again for joining. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.